issue segment tonight, Democrats are trying to bring single-payer health care right here to America, and they won't let facts get in their way. Democrats claim that single-payer will make health care cheaper. But the fact is, according to Scott Ehrlich, single-payer will not only result in worse medical care, but you'll actually pay more for it. With me now, host of the Debating Health radio show, Scott Ehrlich. Scott, thanks for being on the show.
How you doing, Liz?
All right, Scott, tell me what you found. This is interesting. Democrats have been claiming, all the talking heads have been claiming, that single payer will cost less per capita than we currently pay. They compare the per capita rates of European nations who use single payer versus what we pay here in America. But you found that not to be true.
Well, let's be clear on that. It can be true if you're going to go for European levels of care, community, hospital rooms, killing all innovation and drug research, pharmaceutical research. So you can make it as cheap as you want, but if you're going apples to apples, no, it will not be.
All right, so I assume the American people do not want to go apples to apples with a healthcare system that rations and offers out-of-date cancer treatments. So why would a single-payer system here in the United States, if we kept our standard of care, why would it actually make healthcare more expensive for the average American?
Well, there's a few ways. Well, one is the savings aren't nearly what they advertise. I was debating this with someone. It'll be on my next Debating Health podcast, but they said it would save something like $17 trillion over the course of 10 years. When I asked them where that number came from, they said, well, we're going to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse because we know no one does that better than government. And even though I assumed Obamacare had already done that, since that's how he promised to fund it, apparently it hasn't. So apparently there's money in there. And then she said it would come from health insurer profits and the obscene salaries we supposedly pay the CEO. So I said, okay, so you're telling me that 17 trillion over a decade is 1.7 trillion. You're saying that health insurers make $1.7 trillion a year in profit. And she said, well, I'm not saying that. I said, well, that's the only way you could come up with that number over there. So I looked it up, and what health insurers make in profits is $15 billion, which seems like a pretty good amount of money, but the total revenue is around something like 500, 600 billion. So you're really talking about 4 to 6%, which is a decent return, but nothing that's going to, it's not Apple, it's not Facebook, it's not something that people are going to make a fortune investing in their stocks.
Right.
So eliminating that is less than, 1% of where they say the total savings are going to materialize.
Right. And going back to your point about waste, fraud, and abuse here, I think you have a good point that government is not exactly the institution that we generally think about at being good at eliminating that. I mean, what percentage of the payments from Medicaid in 1 year alone actually go to waste, fraud, or abuse, all three of them?
Oh, you set me up perfectly on that because I was waiting for my next point. $15 billion in healthcare costs from profits for health insurers, and I was just looking it up right before I got on your show. About $55 billion a year in false payments through just Medicaid, which again is 1/5 of the population of the United States. Obviously, you extrapolate that to a larger population, it's going to be even your percentage is probably going to go up because you're not going to get the same. The less people you have, obviously, the easier it is to catch for later on. Previously, we were talking about going for 70 million versus 330 million people. It's probably going to go up as a total percentage rather than down.
Right. Plus, when something is offered to the general population under the guise of being quote unquote free, that tends to invite more waste, more fraud, and more abuse because there isn't that personal responsibility or that individual accountability. So I would imagine that number would just go up. But I do want to stick just to the math here. Scott, answer the question, what about Bernie Sanders' argument that the amount of increase that people will pay in taxes to support a single-payer system will actually end up being less than the amount that they pay right now for health insurance premiums? Is that true?
Possible, but again, what does a Bernie Sanders healthcare plan look like? I haven't seen anything in Bernie Sanders' life that shows me that he knows how to balance a budget or what expenses actually cost. I mean, I know when people that haven't been as friendly and have looked objectively at single payer and when they've tried to do it, even his own state had cost about 4 times what was predicted. In New York, I believe it was twice as the number they came up with. In California, it was, I believe, twice what they came up with. New York might have actually been 4 times. So I think his $32 trillion number over a decade is probably off by a magnitude of half, unless you do what you need to bring it down, which is severely ration it, do what the person I argued with which was almost eliminate specialists, which obviously, sure, it'll help costs, but it's not really what people want. And there's such things you need to do, not pay for cares, not get new treatments, not other things that cut significantly end-of-life care would have to be a huge cost driver on it. So there's a lot of things, again, we can do it. And we can make single payer cheaper. But again, I could have a no deductible, I could have a healthcare plan that's much cheaper and have premiums very simple by just having a $100,000 deductible and we don't cover anything. And I could say, great, look at how low my premiums are and everyone's covered for this amount. But It's not a better system.
Right. Well, that's ironic that you brought that up, because that's actually a choice a lot of younger, healthy Americans made before Obamacare told us that we weren't allowed to do that anymore, to buy catastrophic coverage that isn't going to cost, isn't going to pay for co-pays if you just go to the doctor or go to the dentist, but it will cover you if you get into a catastrophe so they don't go bankrupt. One more thing that I want to talk about, and you brought this up at the very beginning of the segment. This is a point I think that is widely overlooked when it comes to single payer. And that's the innovation or the motivation to create new treatments. That's almost lost in a single-payer system.
That's good. Well, Liz, and that's another reason that other countries are able to do it a lot cheaper. And I have an article that's hopefully coming out next week comparing the American healthcare system to some foreign healthcare systems. And we actually do better in life expectancy than I would have thought, actually, looking into this. But one thing that you have to note is the R&D cost in drugs and treatments is huge. We sell them for pennies on the dollar in these other countries because they're basically free riding off our research. If the American market didn't exist as a way to sell these drugs, pharma companies, medical device companies, other research would have no incentive to develop new treatments because they make all their money in the United States. So not only would we not develop new treatments here, but other countries wouldn't see other treatments either. So you'd actually be bringing down both the standard of healthcare in the United States and other countries as well, because innovation would be just squeezed dry, because there's even other countries that produce their own drugs do it for sale in the U.S. market because we're the only place they can make money.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. I'd love to hear Senator Bernie Sanders answer that argument. I don't know how he could argue that the health of the American people and the people around the world would increase under a plan like that. Scott, go ahead. Last word.
According to Bernie, we don't need 37 different type of drugs anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Okay, fair.